Corfe Castle, Purbeck, Dorset. Picturesque from any viewpoint, Corfe Castle has long had the reputation of being haunted, as well it might, for its history is long and gory. King Edward, later known as the Martyr, succeeded his father in A.D. 975 when he was only 15 years of age, in spite of the opposition of the dead king's second wife Elfrida, who had borne the king another son, Ethelred, for whom she sought unsuccessfully to secure the crown of England. The queen retired to Corfe with her son, and a few years later she achieved her ambition. King Edward happened to be hunting in the area in A.D. 978, and becoming detached from the rest of the party, he decided to visit his 10-year-old half-brother, of whom he had always been fond. The former queen met him, and he was offered a stirrup cup of wine, which he had no sooner put to his lips than he was stabbed in the back on the instructions of the treacherous Queen Dowager, who saw the opportunity to dispose of Edward and have her son Ethelred crowned. The king, realizing that he had walked into a trap, turned his horse and raced away, but the wound was a deep one, and halfway down the hill he fell from his mount. One foot was caught in a stirrup, and the king was dragged to the bottom of the hill. Queen's retainers hastily hid the body in the nearby cottage of a blind woman, where it was disguised with old and mean clothing. Before the night was out, so runs the story, the room in the cottage where the body lay hidden was filled with such a heavenly light that it even penetrated the old woman's blindness, and she saw that the dead body was that of the king. Another version has it that the body was hidden in a well, where a mysterious ray of light appeared to glow over the mouth near the castle, a well that became known as St. Edward's Fountain. At all events, the body was eventually recovered and buried at Shaftesbury, but meanwhile, Ethelred did succeed to the throne to become known as Ethelred the Unready. It is said the boy Ethelred was deeply shocked at the assassination of his beloved stepbrother, and he became hysterical and screamed that he did not want to become king at such a price, but his mother seized a candle and beat him into silence. The effect of the murder and the punishment he received always stayed with Ethelred, and for the rest of his life he banned candles from any ceremonial or religious procession in which he took part. It matters little that there was no castle here in those days, and the incident must have occurred at a hunting lodge on the site. The beautiful but wicked Elfrida did remove Edward in the manner described. King John made the castle a royal residence and used it as his treasure house. He also starved to death their 22 French nobles in the dark dungeons. During the Civil War, the treachery of an officer of the garrison allowed the parliamentary troops to gain possession, and the castle was undermined, blown up, and brought to total ruin. So much wickedness, painful deaths, and human treachery has perhaps provided the atmosphere for ghosts and strange happenings. For many years, the castle ruins were said to be haunted by flickering light and dark figures, but reports were less frequent after a gang of smugglers were caught. Yet phantom figures have sometimes been seen in the vicinity of the castle. As evening darkens the sky, and there are reports of an odd, vague figure seen here over the years, a figure that resembles a headless woman. A local resident who saw the mysterious form in 1967 wondered whether it might be connected with the nearby manor house, which is reputed to have a ghost and a secret underground passage that is said to lead to the castle. At first, John Seeger, approaching Corfe Castle at night, thought the figure ahead of him was a woman in a nightgown. But as he drove nearer, he found himself braking hard and said afterwards, "It was a white figure, headless, that drifted across the road in front of me." It moved on down the path at the foot of the castle hill, near the bakery. I suddenly found myself trembling with coldness. It was an experience I would never want again. In 1971, the same figure was seen in approximately the same place by a visitor to the area, and again in 1976 by 3 visitors. Historians have suggested that the ghost is that of someone concerned in one of the many tragic events that have contributed to the history of Corfe Castle. Cotehele, Calstock, Cornwall. Lovely and romantic Cotehele is a fine example of the late medieval home of a squire. It is one of the least altered houses in the county, being built between 1485 and 1520 on the foundations of an earlier house. To wander through Cotehele is to step back in time. There is the splendid hall, the evocative kitchen with its mysterious square hole to the left of the hearth, the kitchen court with its cressets, early medieval lamps, the old dining room with its rich tapestries, the chapel with its fascinating clock, the earliest clock in England still unaltered and in its original position, the punch room with its gay Bacchic tapestries and stone steps within the wall that lead up to the north tower, the white room with its walnut 4-poster bed with Jacobean hangings, the red room so named from the huge crimson-draped 4-poster bed that dominates this mysterious room as it is described in the official guide, the staircase lobby with its pair of mid-17th century chairs carved and ornamented with grotesque contrivances and an infinity of knobs and rings, of which the origin and purpose is wrapped in mystery. The old drawing room visited by George III and Queen Charlotte in 1789. Queen Anne's room, no one knows why it's so called. King Charles's room, where Charles I is said to have rested in 1644, a dark room full of atmosphere that is only lit by 2 small windows. And there have been ghostly happenings at Cotehele in the past, and it may be that something remains of long-forgotten past events, where time has virtually stood still. With its long history of feuds and outlaws, and of hiding and ambush and plans of murder, it's not surprising to learn that there was a tragedy of some kind in the archway leading to the entrance, and that a man was killed there or died in some unremembered episode. The spot where he fell and died was marked forever afterwards by an irremovable blood stain, and hereabouts the mysterious, unidentified, and ghostly form of a man in something like 17th century costume has been seen many times over the years. Later, the blood-stained stone was removed to the little bridge by Cotehele Quay. When I was at Cotehele in 1981, I was told that the bridge had recently been painted and the 200-year-old curiosity had been obscured. In actual fact, the mysterious stain was probably red ironstone, which contains veins that can look like blood when the stone is wet. Another gruesome story told about Cotehele, and repeated by S.P.B. Mays, concerns Caroline Augusta, Countess of Mount Edgecombe, who died in 1881. It is said that a thieving sexton was surreptitiously removing the jewelry from her body after death when she suddenly sat bolt upright on her bier, and the sexton fled empty-handed. More recently and more plausibly, a strong herbal fragrance has been noticed by many people all over the house, including visitors who have no knowledge that such an inexplicable scent has long been noticed at Cotehele. and more rarely the sound of ghostly music has been heard here. The weekend before my last visit in September 1981, a friend of the administrator had asked whether the house was haunted, having walked around the house when it was empty and devoid of visitors. He had experienced puffs of herbal fragrance, heard strains of phantom music, and encountered other experiences which he was loath to relate. In various parts of the house, another visitor had remarked on the fragrance in King Charles's room, and indeed several of the guides will tell you that they have themselves experienced this very pleasant odor in this lovely house. Other ghostly incidents and experiences are less talked about. Cotehele belonged to the Edgecombe family from 1353 until it passed to the National Trust in 1947. It is said that during the last illness of the 5th Earl, a nurse from Tavistock was sitting by his bedside when a woman dressed in white passed through the room. At this period, one could walk right round the house, through the various rooms surrounding the courtyard, and the nurse took little notice of the person she had seen, thinking it must have been the housekeeper. A little later, she saw the housekeeper, and noticing that she was dressed in black, commented, "Have you changed your dress? Because when you passed through the Earl's room, you were in a white dress." The housekeeper replied, "Well, you must have seen the ghost, for I have worn this dress all day, and have not been near the Earl's room today." Apparently, the ghostly figure of a girl in a white dress is repeatedly seen in certain rooms, including what was then the Earl's room some years ago. Mrs. Phyllis Julian, who has lived at Cotehele for many years, tells me what may have been the same figure was seen at Christmastide 1980. A friend had called with her husband to wish Mrs. Julian the compliments of the season. Afterwards, she called on the telephone and asked whether Mrs. Julian had a young girl staying with her, a girl with long hair and wearing a white flimsy dress. They had seen such a girl going down the main staircase on their way out. Mrs. Julian assured her friend that there was no one in the house but herself. It seems that this lady is interested in the subject of ghosts and has seen ghostly forms on other occasions. She spoke to Mrs. Julian because she felt that there was something strange about the figure. Such experiences, someone seeing a figure that has been seen by others but having no previous knowledge of this, led one to wonder whether ghosts are frequently present but are only visible to certain people. Mrs. Julian tells me that she is not able to see or feel these things, and for her the house has a lovely atmosphere, and she is sure that people living there before her have been very happy. Many of the thousands of annual visitors to this lovely house will, I am sure, echo these feelings, but still some of them may see ghosts. Compton Court, Alcester, Warwickshire. Warwickshire. Sure. Yep. The central gatehouse here was built in 1509, but in 1780 the Gothic-style stone wings were added. By contrast, the rest of the house consists of Elizabethan half-timbered upper stories of brick. Inside the house, there is exceptionally fine paneling of different periods, porcelain, furniture, and portraits pertaining to the Throckmorton family who built Coughton. Historically, Coughton is connected with Sir Walter Raleigh, who married Bessie Throckmorton, a lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth. Possibly with the gunpowder plot, according to tradition, the wives of some of the plotters assembled in the drawing room to await news of the outcome of that affair. And the house was the scene of bombardment during the Civil War. It is not known to which period the ghost belongs. The phantom was known as the Pink Lady, and is said to have walked from the tapestry bedroom across the dining room and onto the front stairs. Odd how so many ghosts are associated with bedrooms and stairways. One cannot help wondering what tragic episode gave rise to the appearance of the ghost, and although the present custodian, who has been there for many years, tells me she has never seen or heard any ghost, it may have been very troublesome at one period, for about the turn of the century, the wife of Sir William Throckmorton's agent had a Catholic priest in to lay the ghost. Perhaps, unlike most exorcisms, this one was successful. According to Meg Elizabeth Atkins, the ghostly footsteps always follow the same route. Quote, down the main staircase, across the drawing room, and towards the southwest turret, where the footsteps die away into silence, unquote. A marked change in the atmosphere has been reported when the ghost footsteps of Compton Court walk. Craigievar Castle, Lumphanan, Aberdeenshire, Grampian. Here, Scottish baronial architecture is generally regarded as having reached its greatest pinnacle of achievement, and Cecilia, Lady Simple, told me in April 1982, yes, I am sure Craigievar is haunted. Legend has it that the Blue Room is haunted by the ghost of a member of the Gordon family. Ooh. Traditional feudal enemies of the Forbes, the family who built the property in the 17th century. This Gordon is said to have been forced through the window of the Blue Room by the third laird, the Red Sir John, to fall 4 stories to his death, and he retaliates by returning in ghostly form. For many years, the Forbes Simple family would not sleep guests in the Blue Room for fear of their being disturbed by the ghost, although his presence was usually felt rather than seen. Cecilia, Lady Simple, widow of the late Lord Simple, and last of the family to live at Craigievar, has been good enough to tell me about the ghosts, and I cannot do better than quote from her fascinating letter to me of 21 April 1982. I am sure Craigievar is haunted, but by very benign ghosts on the whole. I have often slept in the castle and had no qualms. I did once feel a presence in the Blue Room and was very momentarily afraid, but I didn't see anyone. Oddly enough, the next night my husband told me he had felt someone in the room. He was away the night I felt someone was there. He used to sleep in that room because it was supposed to be haunted and we didn't want to alarm our guests. The story was that a Gordon was pursued and forced out of the south window, which was then bricked up. The window was reopened by the National Trust 7 or 8 years ago. Many people have heard footsteps going up and down stairs at Craigievar, but no one was ever seen. The most notable ghost story of the castle, so far as I know, was when I saw a number of people in olden dress in the hall late one night when the family was in some trouble and our solicitor came up to talk matters over. He and I were talking in the withdrawing room by the light of one lamp until after midnight. There were only 4 candles in the hall on the table. We were waiting for my husband to come and join the talk, but after midnight he still didn't appear. I got up to go to the hall and saw a man in a philabeg or kilt picking up something from the chest opposite the hall door. I assumed, light was bad of course, this was my husband and went towards him asking him why he hadn't joined us in the withdrawing room. He retreated into the hall and I followed him, asking him why he hadn't joined in the talk with our solicitor. He didn't speak and seemed to hurry ahead of me. Now comes the odd part of this story. When I entered the hall, it seemed full of people, which at the time didn't seem odd to me. I was so anxious to speak to my husband that I just brushed aside the crowd, saying, "Wally, where are you?" It's too late to be funny. He loved playing practical jokes. I looked in the secret stair and the pantry and behind the luggage chairs, pushing through the throng. But I was so intent on my search that I didn't take in the crowd or notice what they were wearing, except that their clothes were unfamiliar. I saw our solicitor looking at me in a puzzled way, and I suddenly felt exhausted. I offered him a drink and then went up to bed. My husband and I found fast asleep in the blue room. My husband I found fast asleep in the blue room. Only the next morning did I think how strange it was to have seen all those people. I told my story to two elderly Scotswomen, who both at different times said the same thing. "My dear, didn't you know that they would come back when you were in trouble?" I am told the most interesting and convincing part of my tale is that at no time did I think I was seeing ghosts. I have an open mind about them, really. Certainly I was not alarmed. Craths Castle, Craths, Kincardine, Grampian. A dramatic survival of 16th century baronial architecture. Craths Castle has been lived in continuously ever since it was built, and it retains its interior decoration, including the remarkable painted ceilings and some of the original furniture. Historical associations go back to 1323, when the lands of Leys were granted to the Burnet family by King Robert the Bruce, and indeed the jeweled horn of Leys, said to have been given by Bruce as a symbol of the gift, is still preserved in the four-story building with its immensely thick walls. The Burnet family built Craths Castle, and a Burnet gave the castle to the National Trust for Scotland in 1951. Craths has long been famous for its Green Lady, a ghost that is said to have appeared on many occasions, and usually before a death of some other grave trouble in the Burnet family. Queen Victoria often visited Craths, and there are reports that on one occasion she saw the Green Lady gliding across a certain room towards a carved fireplace. There the form stooped and lifted up a ghost child before fading away, as she has done so many times before. No one knows the story behind the appearance of this ghost or ghosts, or why she should most often appear before misfortune in the Burnet family. But it was beneath the hearth of the fireplace, where the ghosts disappear, that the skeletons of a woman and child were found some years ago. Perhaps the mortal remains of the Green Lady of Craths and her child. Croft Castle, near Leominster, Hereford and Worcester. Croft Castle looks every inch a castle from the outside, with its 14th and 15th century walls and towers, but inside the hall and the gallery belonged to the 18th century. There is a wealth of delightful plasterwork and some fine paneling, some imported from other houses, which perhaps accounts for the variety of ghosts. Over the years, there have been a number of strange and ghostly incidents reported here, including the sightings of at least 2 unidentified ghosts, one being seen in what is now the Oak Room, another in the hall, and others elsewhere. In the 1920s, a friend of the late Sir James Croft, 11th Baronet, was playing billiards in the room now known as the Oak Room. He turned round and saw the ghostly figure of a huge man dressed in leather. There have been other sightings of a similar figure here, as we shall see, and some people think the ghost is none other than the redoubtable Owen Glendower. It certainly seems only fitting that the ghost should appear somewhere of the man who claimed to be able to call spirits from the vastly deep. There was the time, also in the 1920s, possibly 1926, the present Lord Croft tells me, when some of the Oxford boat race crew were staying at Croft for the weekend. Among the guests was the Oxford stroke of the day, a very tall and powerful man. Sir James Croft was an Oxford cox in his time and coxed the Oxford crew in the boat race of 1926. On one occasion, this prosaic oarsman came downstairs rather late. Just before dinner, and in the dim light of the portrait gallery, he saw the figure of a man with bobbed hair and a leather jerkin, a figure that he estimated was at least 7 feet tall. The apparition faded away within a few seconds. Later, Sir James and other members of the family and some of the guests set out to attend a hunt ball. The cars were at the door, and everyone was outside, when one of the guests realized that he had left his cigarettes in the Oak Room. He ran back, and on reaching the Oak Room, he almost collided with an enormous man who, a moment later, was no longer there. Another member of the party said afterwards that the unimaginative and burly fellow guest, an Oxford oarsman, was green and shaky all evening. While I feel that these 2 incidents recounted to me by 2 different people may have their origin in a single episode, there is no doubt that something of the kind did happen. Lord Croft tells me that he heard the story from Sir James himself and 3 other people who were present. Lord Croft went back to the castle as a tenant of the National Trust in 1956. I have been told that often of an evening in the 1920s, the girls and young men at Croft would play card-guessing games with friends in what used to be called the billiards room, now known as the saloon. Sometimes they would indulge in table turning and planchette a board with a pencil through it. That seemed to answer questions. One evening, they became very worried when they all heard tapping from outside at each window, the Oak Room, Blue Room, Saloon, Library. And then it seemed to turn and come back. Even the dogs showed every sign of distress, their hair literally standing on end. This staggering exhibition of psychic force took place at a time when Sir James was thinking of pulling down the Elizabethan wing, and one planchette message read, "Croft must not destroy Croft." There were other occasions when the unrecognized figure of a man was encountered in the Oak Room, once by a cousin of the family in the daytime. At first she thought it must be a carpenter or workman, until he disappeared as she watched. An Elizabethan ghost has been seen in one of the tower bedrooms. The present Lord Croft tells me the late first Viscount Bledsoe, Bledisloe, who I knew quite well, and he had been a friend of my late father, told me once that when he was Governor-General of New Zealand, he had occasion to visit Australia on official business and was present at a dinner party in Canberra. During the course of conversation after dinner, the subject of ghosts cropped up, and the whole party became respectfully silent when the then Archbishop of Brisbane told how he had a ghostly experience in the mid-20s, when as a canon of the Church of England he was staying at an old castle on the Welsh border. It was at Croft Castle, and the experience occurred while he was drinking his early morning tea in bed in his bedroom. Suddenly he saw very clearly an Elizabethan gentleman in rough puffed sleeves, breeches and hose, with buckled shoes, walking across the room. The apparition paused and looked in his direction, but made no sign, and walked on, disappearing into the wall. Later, he was shown the portrait of Sir James Croft, the comptroller of Queen Elizabeth I's household, which then hung in the Blue Room, and recognized him as the ghost he had seen before breakfast. Lord Croft adds that when he was at Croft Castle in 1949, before it passed to the Trust, my wife read out an account in the Leominster News about a gentleman in full Elizabethan costume being seen walking on Berkshire Common, which is only about 2 miles distant from Croft Castle. The person who saw him recognized him instantly from having seen a reproduction of his portrait in a book called The House of Croft by the late Major Owen Croft. It was Sir James Croft, the comptroller, who died in 1591. Oddly enough, another Elizabethan ghost, or possibly the same one, has been seen on the ground floor at Croft. During a fancy dress dance in the early 1920s, one of the guests spotted someone whom she thought must be a gate crasher, a most elaborately dressed Elizabethan gentleman. She informed several companions, who all saw this person apparently mingling among the guests. When a check was made, the figure had disappeared, but several people who had seen the figure said it resembled the Croft portrait of the 16th century Sir James Croft. During and after the Second World War, Croft Castle was used by a Catholic school. Altars were placed in the rooms used as classrooms. Nuns, quiet and contemplative, were everywhere. A priest lived for a time in one of the towers. There seem to have been few sightings of ghosts at Croft since that time. Perhaps it was all too much for preternatural appearances, and yet in 1980, a 12-year-old grandson of the family told his grandmother that he had seen the form of a little bent old lady in black entering one of the bedrooms. He wasn't at all frightened and described the experience simply and in a very straightforward manner as a matter of fact. The grandmother, who knew that no such person was in the castle, investigated the area investigated the idea that it may have been a shadow or trick of the light, but came to the conclusion that the distinct form that had been seen was not to be explained in this way. Once, too, a woman writer was staying at Croft as a guest, and when her host had to go to London and stay there for the night, the lady absolutely refused to stay alone in the flat, although this was situated above the custodian's premises, and sounds of movement in the television could be faintly heard, so one did not really feel alone there. And then there was the curious incident that happened at the time the family were trying to collect the endowment for the National Trust. A family were trying to collect. A lady who lived in Wales was interested in the family who lived at Croft in the 18th century. She contributed handsomely to the fund and was about to return to Wales after being in England for her sister's funeral. She looked in at Corfe Castle, which chanced to be empty at the time. It was a beautiful, still summer evening. She stopped her car and walked around the house. As she did so, she became aware of some very pleasant 18th century music apparently emanating from the saloon, which is now used for concerts. She may well have been in an emotional state after the funeral and not in her normal frame of mind, perhaps not on her usual wavelength. But that she did have some kind of paranormal experience seems indisputable. One day, in October 1978, the assistant custodian of Corfe Castle was talking to a schoolmaster in the hall. Suddenly, the teacher spun round and said he had seen a reflection in the glass covering a map. The reflection of someone walking across the hall behind him. The custodian, facing the teacher, had seen nothing. The Birmingham schoolmaster took his class to Croft several times. He spent a good deal of time there, one way or another. But that occurrence in the hall was a never-to-be-forgotten experience. Strange, inexplicable, pointless it may have been, but it certainly happened. In the old days, I have been told by someone who knows, at Corfe Castle, when it came to ghosts, it was always a case of, don't talk about it or the servants won't stay. Perhaps now, with no servants, the ghosts will come into their own again. Or have they gone forever? Culloden, east of Inverness, Highland. The National Trust for Scotland has in its care the graves of the clans, the Well of the Dead, the Memorial Cairn, the Cumberland Stone, and Old Leominster farmhouse, now restored as a battle museum. Here, where Prince Charles Edward's army was defeated and the 45 Rising ended, and hereabouts linger, without doubt, some of the ghosts of those doomed Scotsmen. Here where the fate of the House of Stuart was sealed, the setting was changed little since the last pitched battle in Britain was fought on 16 April 1746. Bonnie Prince Charlie's 9,000 tired and hungry Highlanders met 9,000 government troops under the Duke of Cumberland, third son of King George II. And it was all over in 68 minutes. The Highlanders' losses were enormous, the victors cruelly massacring their wounded enemies. The English dead only numbered 50. A cairn and green mounds mark the soldiers' burial place, and from time to time, visitors to the sorrowful place report strange happenings. On occasions, the dim form of a battle-worn Highlander has been seen at dusk in the vicinity of the impressive cairn, and one visitor, while looking closely at the Highlanders' graves here, lifted a square of Stuart tartan which had blown down from the stone on the grave mound, and distinctly saw the body of a handsome, dark-haired Highlander lying at ease, it seemed, full length on top of the mound. The visitor sensed that the figure she was looking at was dead. His clothes were dirty, muddy, and of old-fashioned cut and material. His tartan was the Red Stuart. As she fully realized that she was seeing something of supernormal character, she turned and fled from the field of memories. Miss Wendy Wood has related some of her unusual experiences in her autobiography. At Culloden, the redolent atmosphere may not be as apparent during the summer months when the area is full of visitors, but in the winter months is very strong, and in spring too, around the anniversary of the battle, the whole region takes on a somber and reflective character. Each time it has been outside the summer season when Miss Wendy Wood has encountered something very strange at Culloden. As she and a party of Scottish patriots visited the museum, the cairn, the graves, and the well, she recalled a previous visit, many years before, when she had leaned over the well of the dead and saw in the water not her own reflection, but that of a man with a drawn face, wild eyes, and long black hair. This time she looked again over the well and was confronted with the reflection she had seen before. It was the same man. She had never forgotten that face, the eyes filled with agony, an open cut across the forehead, blood-clotted hair. And suddenly Miss Wood experienced a searing pain in her own brow. With the greatest difficulty, she somehow wrenched herself away from the well and returned to her friends, trying to hide her distress. But her appearance left no doubt that she had had a very curious and disturbing experience, and she records that it took her 3 days to recover fully, and a further 4 days before she lost the pain over her left eye. Culzean Castle, Maybole, Ayrshire, Strathclyde. Picturesque Culzean Castle was built by Robert Adam between 1777 and 1792 around an ancient tower of the Kennedys. And a Kennedy piper haunts the place to this day, especially on Piper's Brae between Happy Valley and the sea, and particularly on winter nights when the cold wind howls from the Firth of Clyde. Then the sound of the ghostly piper is said to be most likely to be heard. Another ghostly sound associated with Culzean goes back 400 years. It is said that here, or possibly at nearby Dunstanburgh Castle, now all but disappeared, Gilbert Kennedy, 4th Earl of Cassilis, arranged for Alan Stewart, commendator of Crossraguel Abbey, to be seized when he visited Culzean, which had become crown property after the Reformation. The story goes that the unfortunate Stewart was dragged to the ominously named Black Vault in the depths of the castle, and there stripped naked, bound to a spit, and roasted before a fire, care being taken to liberally baste him with oil every few minutes to ensure that he did not burn. After repeatedly pleading for mercy or for death, he signed a document surrendering the lands of the abbey to the Earl, and he was taken away to recover. 6 days later, however, he refused to sign a confirmatory document, and the Earl ordered him to be roasted again. When he was near to death, he signed the land away, and was again carried away and allowed to recover. When the matter came to light, Kennedy was fined £2,000 by the Privy Council and bound to keep the peace with Stuart, to whom he had to pay a life pension, but he kept the lands. A great balance of prices. Occasionally, and especially it seems on quiet autumn mornings, the crackling and roaring sounds of a great fire are heard from within these old walls, accompanied by faint, smoke-smothered screams and agonized sighs that soon fade away into silence. A furnished apartment in the castle was presented to General Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1946 as a token of Scotland's appreciation for his services as Supreme Commander of the Allied forces in the Second World War. An area of the castle that is haunted by the ghost of a beautiful girl. What a gift. One afternoon at 5 o'clock, a visitor, Mrs. Margaret Penny, met a lovely dark-haired young woman coming towards her along a corridor. The figure was dressed in an evening gown, which Mrs. Penny immediately thought strange at that hour, but by the time the thought crossed her mind, the figure was almost upon her. The figure was a narrow one, or the corridor was a narrow one, and Mrs. Penny quickly squeezed herself to one wall to allow the girl to pass, saying as she did so, "Not too much room for passing when you're as plump as I am." The young woman passed quickly by, but as she did so, Mrs. Penny felt her entire right side, the side nearest to the beautiful form, suddenly become icy cold. And as she realized that the form had actually walked through her, and she must be seeing a ghost, she seemed to hear the words, "I do not require any room nowadays." And as the words faded away, the figure suddenly and completely disappeared, leaving the corridor deserted. In 1972, 3 servants at the castle reported that they had independently seen an indistinct and inexplicable shape on different occasions in one of the passages leading to the dungeons. While in 1976, 2 visitors saw a peculiar misty shape near the oval staircase. They watched the shape travel up the stairway and out of sight, and afterwards a member of the castle staff told them, "What you have seen is not uncommon. Several people have said they see things on that staircase. It is supposed to be the ghost of one of the Kennedys, although the castle, they knew, is the old tower in a different part of the building. Whatever or whoever it is goes back many years." At the foot of the rock on which the castle stands are the coves of Culzean, rock caves used as smugglers' hiding places, and it is said, the rendezvous of fairies on Halloween. Dunstanburgh Castle, near Alnwick, Northumberland. Today there are only ruins where once proud Dunstanburgh Castle stood. Begun in 1316 by Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, and enlarged by John of Gaunt, the only castle of importance mentioned in the list of 60 licenses granted by Edward II. Cadwallader J. Bates, writing in Border Holds of Northumberland, describes the savage grandeur of the place. A crescent of black cliffs rises 100 feet straight out of the waves to form the northern rampart of the castle. You almost expect to be challenged by the basalt giants that are drawn up like so many warders round the base of the stately Lilburn Tower. and might reasonably conclude that the shattered turrets of the great gatehouse were sustained by power of enchantment. So much do their fantastic outlines peering mysteriously over the green slope of the western escarpment seem to set all known principles of gravitation at defiance. High as these turrets are, in a strong northeast gale the sea dashes up through the rumbled churn into a fountain above them. The one-time owners of this melancholy pile, the earlier lords of Dunstanburgh, might almost have been the prey of some mysterious hereditary malady, for they became extinct in 1244. In Henry VIII's time, the stronghold is described as a very ruinous house and of small strength, but as a superb ruin the castle remains to this day. Dunstanburgh was already a ruin when the events occurred that gave rise to the ghost story associated with this picturesque and vast edifice. Once it was the largest castle in Northumberland. It is said that a knight by the name of Sir Guy was making his way down the Northumbrian coast when a violent storm caused him to look for shelter. The only place in sight was ruined Dunstanburgh Castle, and Sir Guy spurred his horse forward amid the pouring rain and flashes of lightning, looking forward to some shelter among the ruins. As he reached the castle, he dismounted and led his horse to the archway in the keep gatehouse, and there, with the wind and rain for company, he waited beside his steaming horse for the storm to pass. Suddenly a figure appeared before Sir Guy, a shining form that commanded him in a voice that brooked no argument to follow if he wished to find a beauty bright. Puzzled and bewildered, Sir Guy followed his ghostly guide, who led him beneath the castle and through a labyrinth of passages until they reached a brass-bound door. Beyond the door, which was open for him, the knight discovered himself to be in a huge cavern-like chamber, lit by hundreds of flickering lights that shone on dozens of knights in armor who lay deathly white and with closed eyes beside their sleeping horses. Sir Guy was led through these columns of sleeping or entranced warriors to the far end of the hall, where he beheld, to his amazement, a beautiful lady lying on a bier. The sleeping beauty was guarded on either side by two corpse-like figures, one of whom held a horn and the other a sword. Sir Guy's guide intimated that he must choose either the horn or the sword, and that upon his choice depended the fate of the sleeping lady. For a moment, Sir Guy thought about the choice before him, and then he decided that if he blew on the horn, it seemed logical that it would wake the sleepers, so he seized the horn, put it to his lips, and sent a high-pitched blast echoing through the vast chamber. Immediately the horses and the warriors awakened from their sleep and rose to their feet, the knights' hands already reaching for their swords. But the beautiful lady slept on, and then, as Sir Guy felt everything begin to spin faster and faster about him, the whole vision faded, and he woke outside the walls of Dunstanburgh Castle with a couplet running through his head. Woe to the coward that was ever born, who did not draw the sword before he blew the horn. Sir Guy sought diligently for the entrance to the passages that led to the great door that imprisoned the sleeping beauty. Indeed, it is said he searched for years afterwards, but he never found it. Practically identical legends are told about the Eildon Hills in Scotland and Sewing Shields Castle, Northumberland, but amid the ruins of Dunstanburgh to this day, there are stories of the sounds of a high-pitched horn blasting the silence at dead of night, and of visitors suddenly encountering a dark figure resembling a knight in armor of long ago. Among the crumbling ruins and in the vicinity of the old gatehouse towers.